I'm Garrett Mitchell, 32, and I've spent most of my life in my older brother Ryan's shadow. Growing up in Portland, we were always compared, and I always came up short. Last year at our parents' anniversary dinner, when I excitedly shared my new business venture, Ryan laughed. "You're a joke, you'll never be like me," he announced to the table. Something shifted inside me. I stood up, hugged him tight, and walked out without a word. The silence was deafening. 1 month later, he called me desperate. "Let me tell you what happened. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button to join our community of resilient souls who've learned that sometimes walking away is the first step to victory." Ryan was 3 years older, and in our household, that might as well have been 3 decades. From the earliest days I can remember, he was the blueprint for success that I could never quite trace. Our childhood home in suburban Portland was decorated with Ryan's trophies: football, baseball, debate team, science fairs. My parents never explicitly said I should be more like him, but they didn't have to. The message was written across our living room walls, spelled out in golden plastic figurines with Ryan's name etched on every base. "Garrett, come watch your brother's game," Dad would say every Friday night, beaming with pride as Ryan scored touchdown after touchdown. I'd sit in the bleachers, sketching circuit designs in my notebook, occasionally looking up when the crowd roared. Mom would nudge me. "Did you see that? Your brother just broke the school record." I'd nod and return to my drawings. On my 11th birthday, I received a football and cleats. "Maybe you can practice with Ryan," Dad suggested hopefully. The football ended up under my bed, while I saved allowance money to buy components for the computer I was building. When I finally assembled it, showing my parents how I'd coded a simple game, Dad patted my head. "That's nice, son. Did you hear Ryan got offered a scholarship?" Our rooms told the story better than words could. Ryan's walls were plastered with medals and team photos. Mine had a periodic table poster and shelves of science fiction books. During middle school, I discovered programming and spent hours teaching myself coding languages. My parents saw it as me playing on the computer, while Ryan's football practice was building character. There were moments of connection between us. Late nights when Ryan would sneak into my room to play the games I designed, or help me with a bully problem at school. "Nobody messes with my little brother," he'd say, and for those brief moments, I felt the pride of being his family. But by morning, the competition would resume, unspoken but ever present. Ryan sailed through high school as student body president, prom king, and valedictorian. I graduated 2 years later with excellent grades but little fanfare, already accepted to a state college for computer science while Ryan attended an Ivy League university on the East Coast. The pattern continued through our college years. My parents flew to every one of Ryan's important games but made it to only one of my coding competitions, where I placed second nationally. "Not bad," Dad said. "But imagine if you put that brain toward law or medicine." Ryan graduated with honors, immediately landing a prestigious position at a New York financial firm. At family gatherings, he'd arrive in tailored suits, telling stories of Manhattan penthouses and celebrity encounters. I'd listen quietly, aware of my department store clothes and modest one-bedroom apartment. What nobody seemed to notice were the cracks in Ryan's perfect veneer. The way he'd check his phone anxiously during family dinners. How his laughter seemed rehearsed when talking about his amazing colleagues. The increasing frequency with which he'd order another scotch, then another. When he'd boast about the brutal hours and cutthroat environment of his firm, my parents would nod admiringly at his dedication. I saw something different, a brother trapped in a life that looked impressive from the outside but was consuming him from within. Our parents reinforced these roles at every opportunity. "Why can't you network more like your brother?" Mom would ask when I mentioned struggling to find investors for my first app idea. Ryan knew exactly what he wanted and went after it. What she didn't see was that I knew exactly what I wanted too. It just wasn't what Ryan wanted. By the time we were both adults, the roles were firmly established. Ryan was success personified. I was the question mark, the brother with potential who hadn't quite found his way. The most painful part wasn't the comparison itself, but the fact that no one, not even Ryan, could see that we were measuring success by entirely different rulers. College gave me my first taste of freedom from Ryan's shadow. At the state university, nobody knew my brother. Nobody compared us. I thrived in the computer science department, staying up all night in hackathons and finding my people, other tech enthusiasts who valued innovation over tradition. I worked part-time at the campus IT department, saving every dollar I could while maintaining a scholarship that covered most of my tuition. Ryan, meanwhile, sent photos from spring break trips to Cancun and Europe, funded by our parents who believed in investing in connections. During my junior year, I developed my first serious app, a study planner that synchronized with university schedules. It gained traction on campus, and I naively believed this small success would finally earn my parents' recognition. When I called home excited to share the news, Mom listened politely before quickly changing the subject. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Ryan's been invited to the company's executive retreat in the Hamptons?" After graduation, I poured my savings into turning my app into a full business. 3 months later, I was nearly broke with little to show for it. When Ryan found out, he called me from his Manhattan office. "Look, not everyone's cut out to be an entrepreneur," he said, the sound of his fingers tapping on his expensive desk audible through the phone. "The Mitchell genes are better suited for working within established systems. That's why I'm thriving here. Maybe you should apply for an entry-level position at a tech company. Get some experience before trying to be Mark Zuckerberg." I swallowed my pride and took a mid-level coding job at a company in Seattle. The position was respectable, the pay decent, but it felt like admitting defeat. For 2 years I maintained that job, living frugally in a modest apartment, watching from social media as Ryan's star continued to rise. It was at a Seattle coffee shop that I met Lisa. She was a graphic designer with bright blue hair and a laugh that made everyone in the room turn to look. On our third date, she asked about my family, and for the first time, I told someone the unfiltered truth about growing up in Ryan's shadow. "Sounds like you've been measuring yourself with someone else's yardstick," she said simply. That sentence hit me like a revelation. With Lisa's encouragement, I started coding again in my free time, developing a platform that would help small businesses manage customer relationships more efficiently than the expensive systems currently dominating the market. I wasn't trying to create a unicorn startup or impress anyone. I was solving a problem I understood intimately from helping my uncle's small plumbing business struggle with digital transformation. Meanwhile, Ryan's trajectory continued upward. He married Charlotte, a fellow finance executive whose family had the right connections. They bought a penthouse in Manhattan and were featured in a society page spread about young power couples transforming New York. My parents framed the article. At Thanksgiving that year, Ryan held court at our parents' dining table, explaining market trends and dropping names of celebrities whose money he managed. When Mom asked about my job, I started explaining my side project with genuine enthusiasm. Ryan interrupted. "That market's saturated, little brother. The big players have it locked down." He spoke with such authority that no one questioned him, least of all our parents. I knew he was wrong. The big players were ignoring small businesses entirely, but I lacked his confidence, his certainty, his aura of success. That night, Lisa found me sitting on my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling. "Your brother's wrong," she said. "And even if he wasn't, so what? The point isn't whether you succeed by his definition. It's whether you're doing something that matters to you." 3 months later, I quit my job. My parents were horrified. Ryan called to talk some sense into me. But with Lisa's graphic design skills and my programming, we had built a functional prototype that was already being tested by 5 local businesses with promising feedback. I withdrew from family gatherings, unable to bear the concerned looks and subtle suggestions that I was having a breakdown. I stopped calling home as frequently, tired of the inevitable questions about when I'd return to stable employment. Ryan's texts became condescending check-ins that felt more like reminders of his superiority than genuine concern. What no one but Lisa saw was how alive I felt. Working 18-hour days didn't drain me, it energized me. Every problem solved, every feature implemented, every positive comment from our test users fueled me. I wasn't building a business to compete with Ryan's success. I was building something I believed in. My parents' 30th anniversary arrived during this intense development period. Mom called personally to insist I attend the celebration dinner. Ryan and Charlotte are flying in specially, she added, as if that should settle any hesitation on my part. Lisa and I arrived at the upscale Portland restaurant 15 minutes early. My parents hugged us warmly but kept glancing at the door. Ryan texted they're running a bit late, Mom explained, checking her watch for the third time. When Ryan and Charlotte finally swept in 20 minutes late, the atmosphere instantly changed. My brother looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine cover in his designer suit, Charlotte elegant beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They carried gift bags from luxury brands and apologized for their tardiness with practiced charm. The driver got lost, Ryan explained, though I knew he'd grown up in this city and the restaurant was only 10 minutes from our parents' house. But we brought back some special wines from our trip to Napa last weekend. Mom was delighted, Dad impressed. The conversation immediately turned to Ryan and Charlotte's recent vacation, their upcoming plans for a holiday in the Maldives, the renovation of their penthouse. I sat quietly beside Lisa, who squeezed my hand under the table. So, Garrett, Charlotte finally said during a lull, perhaps remembering her social obligation to include everyone. Ryan mentioned you left your job. What are you up to these days? The table fell awkwardly silent. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. For weeks, I'd been making genuine progress with my software platform. Just yesterday, an angel investor had expressed serious interest after seeing our prototype. Actually, I've been building a customer relationship management platform for small businesses, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We've got a working prototype with test users, and we're in talks with potential investors. Dad looked confused. Mom smiled politely. Charlotte nodded with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly interesting documentary. Ryan set down his wine glass with a definitive clink. Another CRM? In this economy? He laughed, looking around the table as if expecting everyone to join in. The market's oversaturated, and you're going up against companies with billions in resources. It's different, I explained, feeling my confidence waver but pressing on. We're specifically targeting small businesses that can't afford enterprise solutions. There's actually a significant gap in the market. There's a gap because there's no money there, Ryan interrupted. Trust me, if there was profit to be made, the big players would be all over it. This is why you should have stayed in your lane, gotten more experience before trying to reinvent the wheel. Ryan, our mother cautioned softly, sensing the tension. No, he needs to hear this. Ryan continued, leaning forward. I've watched you bounce from idea to idea since we were kids. Remember that ridiculous robot you tried to build? Or that gaming app in college that went nowhere? You always start things you can't finish. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, though logically I knew it hadn't. Lisa's hand tightened around mine. I'm just trying to save you from yourself, Ryan continued, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he reserved for what he considered my failures. You're my brother. I don't want to see you fail again. This startup fantasy is just that, a fantasy. You're not cut out for it. I looked at my parents, hoping for some defense, but saw only uncomfortable expressions. They wouldn't contradict their golden child, even now. The investor we met yesterday doesn't think it's a fantasy, I said quietly. Ryan rolled his eyes dramatically. Some small-time angel probably. Look, Garrett, let's be real. You're a good coder, but you're not a businessman. You're not me, and you never will be. He laughed again, raising his glass. You're a joke if you think you'll ever be like me. And maybe that's for the best. The table fell completely silent. Charlotte looked embarrassed. My parents stared at their plates. Lisa's body tensed beside me, ready to leap to my defense. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of feeling hurt or angry, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Ryan was right. I would never be like him, and suddenly, I realized that was my greatest strength, not my failure. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Everyone looked up, perhaps expecting an outburst or a dramatic exit. Instead, I walked around the table to where Ryan sat. Confusion crossed his face as I leaned down and wrapped my arms around him in a genuine hug. "You're right," I said quietly, so only he could hear. "I'll never be like you. Thank you for helping me see that clearly." I straightened up, nodded to my stunned parents, took Lisa's hand, and walked calmly out of the restaurant into the cool evening air. "What just happened back there?" Lisa asked as we reached the car. "Freedom," I answered, feeling lighter than I had in 32 years. "I'm finally free." The weeks following that dinner marked a fundamental shift in my life. I stopped measuring my progress against Ryan's yardstick and focused entirely on building something valuable. Lisa and I converted our apartment's second bedroom into a full-time office, covering the walls with user flow diagrams and feature roadmaps. I limited contact with my family to brief weekly calls with my mother, who carefully avoided mentioning the anniversary dinner incident or asking too many questions about my business. I could hear the worry in her voice, worry that I was having some sort of breakdown or midlife crisis, but I no longer felt the need to convince her otherwise. "I'm doing well, Mom," I'd say. "The business is progressing. How's Dad's garden coming along?" And we'd shift to safer topics. 3 weeks after the dinner, I received an email from a venture capital firm that specialized in B2B software. Someone from our initial group of test users had connections there and had shown them our platform. The email requested a meeting, and within 2 weeks, we were signing paperwork for our first serious round of funding. The money wasn't huge by Silicon Valley standards, $750,000, but it was enough to rent a small office space, hire 2 additional developers and a marketing specialist, and give ourselves runway for a year of development. The VC firm connected us with mentors who helped refine our business model and strategy. For the first time, my idea was being taken seriously by people who understood the industry. The work was relentless. I coded 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. Lisa handled design, user experience, and kept me functioning with food and occasional reminders to sleep. There were technical challenges that seemed insurmountable, nights where I questioned everything, mornings where I woke up certain we were on the verge of failure. "This is normal," one of our mentors assured me during a particularly difficult week when our database architecture needed a complete overhaul. "Every founder goes through the valley of despair. Keep going." So I did. We released a beta version to 50 small businesses across different industries: plumbers, local restaurants, boutique retail shops, accounting firms. The feedback was mixed but constructive. We iterated rapidly, solving problems and adding features that our users actually needed rather than what we thought they should want. 6 months in, we landed our first major client, a regional association of independent hardware stores looking for a unified customer management solution. Their annual contract alone would cover our monthly burn rate. The day they signed, Lisa brought champagne to the office, and our small team celebrated what felt like a turning point. Meanwhile, through occasional updates from my mother, I heard that Ryan continued his ascent. His firm had put him in charge of a major new division. He and Charlotte had been featured in another magazine spread, this time about their Hamptons summer home. They were considering starting a family, though Charlotte was concerned about how a baby would impact her career trajectory. I absorbed these updates with a strange new detachment. Ryan's life, which had once been the measuring stick for my own worth, now seemed like a story about someone I used to know. I didn't feel jealousy or resentment anymore, just a kind of distant acknowledgement that we were on entirely different paths. Our company, which we'd named Connectly, hit milestones faster than our business plan had projected. By month 8, we had over 200 paying customers and were approaching profitability. The interface Lisa had designed was receiving praise for its intuitive layout, specifically built for non-technical users. Our support team, which now included 4 people, maintained a remarkable 98% satisfaction rating. I remained intentionally frugal despite our growing success. I drove the same 5-year-old Honda, lived in the same apartment, though we'd reclaimed the second bedroom after moving to our office space, and reinvested everything into improving the product and growing our team. Lisa teased me about being the least flashy founder in tech, but supported the approach. Build something real first, she'd say. The trappings can come later. At the 1-year mark, our user base had grown to over 1,000 businesses. We were featured in a tech industry blog as an emerging player in small business software, which led to a flurry of new sign-ups. I had to hire 3 more developers and a customer success team to keep up with growth. My parents called to tell me they'd seen the article, forwarded to them by a neighbor whose son worked in tech. There was a new note in my mother's voice, something like surprise mixed with the beginning of pride. My father got on the phone, clearing his throat awkwardly before saying, "Sounds like you're really making something of this business idea, son." It wasn't quite approval, but it was acknowledgement, which felt like a step forward. I didn't mention that we were now generating more monthly revenue than my previous annual salary at the tech company I'd quit. I maintained a minimal social media presence, focusing on building rather than broadcasting. Lisa handled our company's online profiles, which were growing in followers as our reputation spread. Occasionally, she'd show me Ryan's latest posts, exotic vacations, charity galas with celebrities, a new sports car. The captions always emphasized his blessed life and unstoppable success. "He seems to be trying very hard to convince everyone how happy he is," Lisa observed once, scrolling through his feed. I nodded, remembering the anxious phone checking, the extra drinks, the practiced laughter I'd noticed at family gatherings. What I didn't know then was that behind Ryan's carefully curated online persona, things were beginning to unravel in ways neither of us could have predicted. The market was shifting, regulations tightening, and the aggressive strategies that had propelled his firm to such heights were coming under increased scrutiny. While I was building Connectly with a focus on sustainable growth and real value for customers, Ryan was riding a wave that was about to crash spectacularly against the shore. The foundations of our lives were about to reverse completely, and neither of us was prepared for what would happen next. 18 months after walking out of that anniversary dinner, Connectly was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. A series of regulatory changes had hit the enterprise software market, requiring stricter data protection measures that the major players were struggling to implement quickly. Our platform, built from the ground up with privacy in mind, suddenly became not just an affordable alternative for small businesses, but a compliant one as well. The timing couldn't have been better. While the tech giants scrambled to overhaul their systems, we captured a significant portion of the small to medium business market. Our user base quadrupled in 3 months. The venture capital firm that had initially funded us connected me with larger investors, and we secured a Series A round of $12 million. Lisa, now officially my fiancée as well as my business partner, orchestrated a public relations campaign that positioned Connectly as the secure, user-friendly alternative to bloated enterprise systems. Tech publications began reaching out for interviews. I remained behind the scenes as much as possible, preferring to let our CTO handle the technical presentations while I focused on product development and strategy. We moved to larger offices in downtown Seattle and expanded to a team of 40 people. I insisted on sustainable growth rather than the move fast and break things mentality that dominated much of tech. Our investors, initially skeptical of this approach, were won over by our consistent performance and low customer churn rate. "You've built something remarkable here," one of our board members told me after a quarterly review. "You're not just acquiring users, you're keeping them. That's rare." As Connectly grew, I began to reconnect with my family in small ways. I called my parents more regularly and sent them updates about the company's progress. They responded with increasing interest and enthusiasm, though Ryan remained a sensitive subject that we all tacitly agreed to avoid. That changed when I received an unexpected email from a business reporter working on a story about financial firms under federal investigation. The journalist wanted to confirm whether I was related to Ryan Mitchell, as they were researching a piece about his company's alleged involvement in manipulating certain market segments. The email hit me like a bucket of ice water. I hadn't spoken to Ryan since that night at the restaurant, and now a reporter was suggesting he might be involved in something potentially illegal. I called my parents immediately. "We're not sure what's happening," my mother said, her voice tense. "Ryan says it's just a regulatory misunderstanding that will blow over. He doesn't want to discuss details." A quick internet search revealed preliminary reports about a federal investigation into several financial firms, including Ryan's. The allegations involved manipulating client fund allocations and misrepresenting investment risks. Nothing had been proven, and no charges had been filed, but the market was reacting. The stock price of Ryan's firm had dropped significantly over the past month. I debated reaching out to Ryan directly but decided against it. Our last interaction had made it clear he wouldn't welcome my concern, and he certainly wouldn't share sensitive information about his company's legal troubles. Instead, I focused on Connectly while keeping an eye on the developing story from a distance. 3 weeks later, the story broke wide open. Federal regulators announced formal charges against Ryan's firm for fraudulent practices, specifically naming several executives, including my brother. The company's stock plummeted, losing 70% of its value in a single day. Financial news channels featured Ryan's firm as the latest in a series of Wall Street scandals, with his name mentioned prominently in most reports. My phone rang that evening. It was my mother, crying. "They raided his office today," she said between sobs. "There were reporters everywhere. It's all over the news. Ryan says he didn't do anything wrong, that he was following company policies, but they've suspended him pending the investigation." I felt a complex mix of emotions: concern for my parents, shock at the situation, and if I'm being honest, a small, shameful sense of vindication that Ryan's perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. I immediately pushed that feeling aside, focusing instead on comforting my mother. "What can I do to help?" I asked. "Just be there for him if he reaches out," she said. "He's going to need his family now more than ever." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me, but I agreed nonetheless. I didn't expect Ryan to contact me, given our history and his pride. Meanwhile, Connectly continued its upward trajectory. A major tech publication ran a feature on our company's approach to ethical data management, contrasting it with the increasing scandals in both finance and big tech. Without naming names or making direct comparisons, the article positioned our business philosophy as the antithesis of the high-risk, rule-bending culture that had led to situations like the one Ryan's firm was facing. The publicity led to our biggest month of growth yet. Microsoft expressed interest in a potential partnership that would integrate Connectly with their small business suite. Google's venture arm reached out about participating in our next funding round. We were no longer just a promising startup. We were becoming a significant player in our market segment. I bought a house, not a mansion, but a beautiful 4-bedroom Craftsman in a quiet Seattle neighborhood with a view of the lake. Lisa and I moved in together, converting one room into a home office and another into an art studio for her design work. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was comfortable, tasteful, and paid for without overextending ourselves. 3 days after we moved in, my phone rang with an unknown New York number. It was nearly midnight in Seattle, which meant 3 a.m. on the East Coast. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a wrong number or spam call. "Hello?" I said cautiously. There was a long pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in almost 2 years. "Garrett? It's Ryan. I need your help." Ryan's voice sounded nothing like the confident, almost arrogant tone I remembered. He spoke quietly, with an edge of desperation that caught me off guard. "Can you talk?" he asked when I didn't immediately respond. I stepped out onto the back deck of my new home, closing the door softly to avoid waking Lisa. "I'm here. What's going on?" What followed was a 30-minute monologue of collapse. Ryan's firm had imploded in the wake of the federal investigation. Criminal charges had been filed against the CEO and several top executives. While Ryan hadn't been charged, he was named as a person of interest and had been fired. To distance the remaining organization from the scandal, as he put it. I followed protocols, he insisted, his voice cracking. I implemented strategies approved by legal. I didn't know, or didn't want to know, that we were crossing lines. The consequences had cascaded rapidly. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The penthouse, heavily mortgaged despite his substantial income, was being foreclosed on. Charlotte, unwilling to weather the social and financial storm, had filed for separation and moved back to her parents' estate in Connecticut. She said she married a rising star, not a cautionary tale, Ryan said with a bitter laugh. Can't really blame her. I'd leave me too if I could. The most immediate problem was housing. With his accounts frozen and reputation in tatters, Ryan couldn't even rent an apartment in New York. He'd been staying in hotels of decreasing quality, as his available cash dwindled. I've got about 3 days of hotel money left, he admitted. After that, I don't know what I'm going to do. Mom and Dad offered their guest room, but I can't face them yet. Not like this. Then came the request I'd been anticipating since he started talking. I know we haven't exactly been close, and I know that's on me, Ryan said, the words clearly difficult for him to articulate. But I need somewhere to stay while I sort this out. Just for a month, maybe 2 at most. Just until my lawyer can get some of my accounts unfrozen. The old Garrett would have jumped at the chance to help, eager to finally earn Ryan's approval. The new Garrett paused, weighing the complexities of the situation. You still there? Ryan asked after my extended silence. I'm thinking, I replied honestly. Look, I get it if you want to tell me to go to hell after how I treated you, he said. I deserve that. But I'm desperate here, Garrett. I've got nowhere else to go. I thought about the last time we'd spoken, his dismissive words, the years of condescension. I also thought about the little boy who had once taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me against neighborhood bullies, who had, in his own flawed way, tried to protect me from failure by discouraging my riskier endeavors. Let me talk to Lisa, I said finally. I'll call you back tomorrow. Lisa was understanding but cautious when I explained the situation over breakfast. He's family, she acknowledged. But he's also toxic. If we do this, there need to be clear boundaries. We spent the morning discussing what those boundaries would look like. By the time I called Ryan back, we had a framework in place. You can stay with us, I told him. But there are conditions. The conditions were straightforward: a 3-month maximum stay, no alcohol in the house, he would need to contribute to household chores, and he would need to be respectful of our space and work. Most importantly, he would need to acknowledge that our relationship would be rebuilt on new terms, as equals, not as superior and inferior. That's fair, Ryan said after I laid out the terms. He sounded surprised, perhaps having expected either an outright rejection or unconditional acceptance. The concept of boundaries was clearly new territory in our relationship. A week later, I picked up my brother from Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The man who walked through the arrival gate barely resembled the Ryan I remembered. His designer suit had been replaced with jeans and a rumpled button-down. His normally perfect hair was longer, unkempt. He'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He carried a single suitcase and a laptop bag, all that remained of his former life. Thanks for this, he said awkwardly as we loaded his meager belongings into my Honda. He glanced at the practical, mid-range car with what might have once been disdain but now looked more like resignation. The drive home was mostly silent, punctuated by his occasional questions about Seattle and brief comments about the weather. Neither of us mentioned the financial scandal, his divorce proceedings, or our last encounter. Those conversations could wait. When we pulled into the driveway of my home, Ryan stared through the windshield for a long moment. This is yours? he asked, studying the handsome craftsman house with its neatly landscaped yard. Lisa and I bought it last month, I confirmed, trying to keep any defensiveness out of my voice. Inside, Ryan's reaction to our home was telling. He walked slowly through the open-concept main floor, taking in the comfortable but quality furnishings, the large windows overlooking the lake, the tasteful art, much of it Lisa's, on the walls. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse. It wasn't featured in architectural magazines. But it was beautiful, solid, and ours. You've done well for yourself, he said finally, and I could hear the genuine surprise in his voice. Lisa emerged from her studio to greet him, warm but reserved. She showed him to the guest room, spacious, with its own bathroom and a desk where he could work. He thanked her with an awkwardness that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being the recipient of generosity rather than its magnanimous provider. That first evening established the pattern for the days that followed. Ryan was quiet, almost ghost-like, spending most of his time in the guest room on calls with his lawyer or staring at financial news on his laptop. He followed our house rules meticulously, perhaps afraid that one misstep would result in his eviction. He washed his dishes immediately after using them, kept his room spotless, and offered to help with any household task. It was a week before we had our first real conversation. I found him late one night sitting on the back deck, staring out at the lights reflecting on the lake. "Can't sleep?" I asked, stepping outside with 2 mugs of herbal tea. He accepted the tea with a nod. "Haven't really slept well since this all started." I sat in the adjacent chair, giving him space to talk if he wanted to. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken thoughts. "I didn't see it coming," he finally said. "Any of it. The investigation, Charlotte leaving, all of it. One day I'm on top of the world, and the next." He gestured vaguely with his free hand. "Life can change quickly." I agreed. "The thing is," Ryan continued, his voice low, "part of me knew something wasn't right. The returns we were promising clients, the way management would shut down certain questions. I chose not to look too closely because the money was good and the recognition was." He trailed off, then looked at me directly. I wanted Dad to keep looking at me the way he always did. Like I was something special. It was perhaps the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me. "I know something about trying to live up to expectations," I replied. Ryan gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I guess you would." He took a sip of tea, then added, "I never understood why you walked away that night. At the restaurant. You just hugged me and left. Who does that?" "Someone who finally realized he was playing the wrong game," I said. We talked until the early hours of the morning, really talked, perhaps for the first time as adults. About our childhood, the competition between us, the different pressures we'd each faced. About how Ryan's apparent perfection had been its own kind of prison. About how my perceived failures had ultimately freed me to build something authentic. As dawn broke over the lake, Ryan asked the question that had clearly been on his mind since arriving. "How did you do it? Build all this, I mean. After everything, after I told you that you'd never make it." I considered my answer carefully. "I stopped trying to be you," I said finally, "and started figuring out who I actually was." Ryan's integration into our household happened gradually, like a time-lapse of ice melting. The initial awkwardness gave way to a tentative routine, then to something approaching comfort. Lisa, whose initial wariness was justified given what she knew of our history, began to see glimpses of the person beneath Ryan's carefully constructed facade. "He's actually funny when he's not trying so hard to impress everyone," she remarked one evening after Ryan had made us all laugh with stories of his college misadventures, the failures and embarrassments he'd previously hidden behind achievements. My brother's perspective on my company evolved as well. Initially, he'd asked polite but superficial questions about Connectly, clearly making an effort but not truly understanding what we built. That changed when I invited him to join a virtual team meeting. "I thought you might have some insights to share about customer acquisition in regulated industries," I said casually, though we both knew it was more than that. It was an olive branch, an acknowledgement of his expertise despite his current circumstances. Ryan sat silently through most of the meeting, listening intently as my team discussed strategies and challenges. Afterward, he seemed almost dazed. "You've built something real here," he said. "The way your team talks about the product, the customers, it's not just about metrics and growth. They actually care about solving problems." "That's the whole point," I replied. As weeks passed, Ryan began offering genuinely helpful suggestions about our business model and expansion strategy. His background in finance, stripped of the toxic aspects of his former company's culture, provided valuable perspective. My team appreciated his insights, and he seemed to draw energy from contributing to something constructive. The inevitable confrontation with our parents couldn't be postponed indefinitely. A month into Ryan's stay with us, they announced plans to visit Seattle. They hadn't seen Ryan since before the scandal broke, and their concern was palpable even through brief phone conversations. "They're going to look at me differently now," Ryan confessed the night before their arrival, pacing the living room anxiously. "Dad especially. I was always his success story. Maybe it's time for them to know their actual sons, not their ideas of us," I suggested. The reunion was emotionally charged but ultimately healing. Our mother cried when she saw Ryan, thinner and humbler than the son she remembered. Our father, always uncomfortable with emotional displays, stood awkwardly until Ryan took the initiative to embrace him. "I'm sorry," Ryan said simply. "I'm not who you thought I was." Dad pulled back, his expression serious. "You're my son," he said firmly. "That's who you are. The rest is just details." Over dinner at our home, prepared jointly by Lisa and Ryan, who had discovered an unexpected interest in cooking, our parents got their first real glimpse of the company I'd built. Ryan, surprisingly, became my most enthusiastic advocate. "You should see his team in action," he told them. "Garrett's created something remarkable here. These people would walk through fire for him because he leads with integrity." The look of pride that crossed my father's face was something I'd spent decades hoping to see. Now that it was finally directed at me, I found it gratifying but no longer essential. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned to measure my worth by my own standards. As Ryan's initial month or two extended toward the 3-month mark we'd agreed upon, Lisa and I had several private conversations about next steps. The guest room had become undeniably his space, with legal books stacked on the desk and his running shoes by the door. He'd become a fixture in our lives, joining us for dinner, helping with household projects, even accompanying Lisa to her art exhibitions. "What do you want to do?" she asked me one night. "The 3-month deadline is coming up." I considered the question carefully. "I think he needs more than just a place to stay now. He needs a purpose." The next morning, I proposed an idea that had been forming in my mind for weeks. Connectly had been discussing launching a foundation focused on financial literacy for small business owners, a way to give back and address a genuine need we'd identified among our customers. We needed someone with financial expertise and a personal understanding of both ethical and unethical business practices to lead it. "You want me to run your foundation?" Ryan asked, clearly shocked by the offer. "I want you to build it," I clarified. "From the ground up. You understand the financial world in ways I never will, and now you've seen both sides of it. That perspective is valuable. Why would you trust me with this after everything?" "Because you're not the same person who told me I'd never make it," I said simply. "And I'm not the same person who needed your approval." Ryan accepted the position with a seriousness that reflected his understanding of the second chance he was being offered. The salary was modest compared to his Wall Street days, but it came with something his previous career had never provided: the opportunity to create genuine value rather than just wealth. As for our living arrangement, we agreed that he would stay with us until he found his footing, but with the understanding that he was welcome as long as he needed. In time, he found a small apartment nearby, walking distance from both our home and the Connectly offices. The legal issues from his former firm continued, but with diminishing impact on his daily life. He cooperated fully with investigators, which helped his own legal position while providing authorities with valuable insights into the company's practices. Eventually, a settlement was reached that allowed him to move forward, chastened but not destroyed. Our parents adjusted to the new dynamic between their sons with surprising adaptability. Mom admitted, during a private moment, that she'd always worried about the pressure Ryan faced as the successful one. Dad, in his own way, acknowledged that he'd failed to appreciate my different path. "I didn't understand what you were building," he told me during a tour of our offices. "I didn't have the vision to see it." The most profound change, however, was in Ryan himself. The arrogance that had defined him for so long gave way to a more authentic confidence based on values rather than validation. He threw himself into developing the foundation, applying the same intensity that had once driven his climb up the corporate ladder, but now directed toward genuine impact. 6 months after he'd arrived at our doorstep with a single suitcase, Ryan stood beside me at Connectly's annual company gathering, introducing the Foundation's initiatives to our team and partners. Watching him speak passionately about financial empowerment for underserved businesses, I barely recognized the brother who had once dismissed my dreams as jokes. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Ryan found me on the rooftop terrace overlooking the Seattle skyline. "Thank you," he said, the simple words carrying the weight of everything that had transpired between us. "For what specifically?" I asked with a small smile. "The job? The place to stay?" "For hugging me instead of punching me that night at dinner," he replied. "You had every right to hate me after what I said." I shook my head. "Hating you would have kept me trapped in our old dynamic. I needed to be free of that more than I needed to be right." Ryan looked out at the city lights, thoughtful. "You know what the hardest part of all this has been? Realizing that everything I thought made me successful, the money, the status, the appearances, was actually making me miserable. I was so busy proving my worth that I never stopped to figure out what I actually valued." "It's never too late to figure that out," I said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." As we stood there, two brothers with paths that had diverged dramatically only to converge again in unexpected ways, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The childhood competition, the years of living in shadows, both his and my own, the painful breaking point, and the rebuilding of something authentic from the rubble of false expectations. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about comparison or validation. It wasn't about being better than someone else or meeting external standards. True success came from building something that aligned with your own values, something that would stand firm even when the winds of fortune changed direction. Ryan had learned that lesson the hard way. I had learned it by walking away from a game I could never win, and discovering a different game altogether, one where the only opponent was my own potential. So what did I say when my brother, once so dismissive of my dreams, begged to stay at my place after his perfect life collapsed? I said yes. Not out of obligation or vindication, but because we both deserved the chance to know each other as we truly were, beyond the roles we'd been assigned. And in doing so, we both found something more valuable than success. We found authenticity, purpose, and eventually, a brotherhood based on mutual respect rather than competition. If there's one lesson I could share from our story, it's this: never let someone else's definition of success become your prison. The most powerful thing you can do is walk away from expectations that aren't serving you, even, or especially, when they come from those closest to you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone else's expectations to find your own path? Drop a comment below to share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Your support helps us share more stories of authentic success and personal transformation. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest victory comes not from defeating others, but from finding the courage to define success on your own terms.